We are going to record this meeting just so if folks aren't able to attend, there's a way that they can view after and catch up. And just also another reminder to just try to keep your microphones muted during the presentation. And if we could go to the agenda slide. So after a quick intro from Supervisor Stephanie Moulton-Peters, we're going to have a presentation from one of our rising environmental youth leaders. And then we're going to go through a quick recap of how we got to our current phase of the project, and then dive into some of the community feedback that we've been hearing through the concept design process. And after that, we're going to go through actually the concept evaluations and talk about some of our favorite approach for moving forward with this project and get into some next steps. And we're hoping to move through all of that relatively quickly so that we can save about 20 minutes to just go through some questions and answers and have a good discussion with you all. So I just wanted to remind everyone, if you think of questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll get to them towards the end of the evening. And if folks feel like they need to sign off after we get through our big announcements tonight, feel free to do that. But we are going to try to get to those quickly. So with that, I'm really pleased to introduce Supervisor Stephanie Moulton-Peters, and she's going to give us an introduction for tonight.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Rob. I am so delighted to be here. This is one of the most exciting projects going on in the county, and I would say in the Bay Area, if you ask me. You know, with 10 inches of sea level rise predicted for this area as early as 2030, making progress on this project is so important to mitigate potentially more significant impacts to habitats, wildlife, and access to the multi-use pathway. It's been wonderful to see the process has been taking place to this point. The level of community engagement has been very high, and it's probably one of the most important features of the success of this project is the community engagement. And I want to give a shout out to the team here tonight. You've done a fantastic job of reaching out to our community and soliciting input. And to our community, you've done a great job of chiming in and letting us know what you think. What we saw through this engagement process is that there's a lot of support for concept 3. You'll be hearing about that tonight, the Ring the Marsh concept. And I'm also in favor of that because I see realigning this pathway as a way to benefit the environment, the health of the wetlands, but also the viewer experience, the recreational experience, and create some greater ties to the Tam Valley community and the local businesses where people who are on the multi-use path can stop in, take a rest, and see what's going on as they head north or south on the path. So another observation I'd like to share is that the Bothin Marsh project supports the open space preserve by opening up opportunities for partnership and collaboration for broader community sea level rise adaptation planning in southern Marin. Gee, I tripped all over that. But the truth is we all have to come together to do adaptation planning to kind of get our heads around the future that's ahead of us and ways we need to rethink our community. This is a positive example and one with a lot of benefits to rethink how we're doing things right now. And then finally, as a member of the One TAM Advisory Committee, I'm especially proud of the focus on youth education and climate change programs through programs such as LINK and Rising Youth Environmental Leaders. It's my pleasure now to introduce you all to Wambua, who participated in this past year's One TAM program, Rising Environmental Youth Leaders, was an after-school virtual program for high school students. Wambua is going to share his experience learning about climate change and youth leadership. Thank you.
All right, Thank you, Supervisor.
Oh, if you'd allow me, yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Wambuma Yoki, and I'm here to talk a little bit about the Rising Environmental Youth Leadership Program, which is short for REAL, obviously. This past year was the first year that One Tam actually started the program, and I was lucky enough to be a part of it with 12 or so other high schoolers, and it was a really great learning experience. The program really tried to encourage community activism and trying to get youth involved in environmental science and environmental research. We got to learn things such as fire ecology and pollution, but I think the lesson that really resonated with me was the lesson on sea level rise and flooding. Mostly because it hit pretty close to home, because I live in Strawberry, which is right near Tam Valley, which gets flooded like every year. And then also I've been participating in organizations such as Shore Up Marin City, which helps to try to address some of the flooding and sea level rise that Marin City gets. And that is especially detrimental because there is only one exit and one entrance in and out of Marin City, and that is the part that gets flooded. So essentially, this entire community gets cut off every year from necessities such as actually going to get a job, or even grocery stores, or even hospitals, which is, as you can tell, really detrimental. So I actually got to take part in addressing this issue because of REAL. There's this program called the project called the Community Action Project, which helped to, again, encourage community activism. Each student would go into their community and figure out an issue that they wanted to address and actually address it. And I thought that was really helpful. And what I did, since I was already so interested in sea level rise and flooding, I created a survey that tried to get like public interest or public knowledge on sea level rise in this particular community in the Bay Area. And I had a really amazing time actually creating the survey, because it kind of showed me how important the public is in addressing issues such as sea level rise and flooding. And I'd actually like to share my survey with you guys if I have the chance, like share my process of it. So let me share my screen. Oh, I do not have screen sharing available. Sorry about that.
Looks like they're working on it. I see knitted brows by Rob and Christina. Hold tight.
Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the survey. So essentially, it just goes through like the different, I have different questions about public interest, such as like how much flooding. Oh, actually, here, let me share the screen. Here's my survey. This is kind of like the bare bones blueprint of it. As you can see, I've got some questions like from 1 to 10. How much do you know about sea level rise? Some important info to try to give the public more knowledge about flooding and sea level rise and how it kind of connects. Do you experience flooding in your area? I kind of made it so that depending on how you answer certain questions, it'll take you to a different part of the survey to try to get a more accurate depiction of the person taking the survey. So I kind of went into like, if you were to say yes to this question, you'd go to this section. If you said no, you'd go to this section over here. So it really was like a kind of way to, again, gain that public interest and knowledge. But I think the most important part is at the end, where I rank the different solutions of solutions against flooding. So I'd actually have the recipient of the survey rank what their favorite option was and their least favorite option. I gave 5 that I thought were like the top 5 that could actually help in stopping sea level rise, such as levees and water pumps, and like raising the roads, restoring wetlands and wildlife habitats, and replacing and upgrading piping. And if we want to actually look at the responses for this part, I think it's very interesting. If we go to all the way to the end, we can see that the most, with 75% of the vote, the most favorited option of all of the solutions was restoring wetlands and wildlife habitats. And I know that this is a huge issue that you guys are trying to address with the Evolving Shorelines project and the Bothin, I think the Bothin wetland, is that what it's called? It's interesting, and I think this is really good data, but Obviously, I need more. I only have like 56 responses. So I'm actually going to share this survey in the chat, and I'm hoping that you guys could help me kind of get more responses for it so I can send it to some organizations that can help make a difference. So here, let me send that to the chat right now. And that's essentially the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for having me and listening. Yeah, great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Wambua. It was really great working with you and the rest of the youth through the Rael program. So we are going to switch gears to talk about just where we got to on this project today. And if we could just bring up the Bothin map overview. I just wanted to reorient everyone to Bothin Marsh. And when we talk about the open space preserve, we're really talking about this area of South Bothin Marsh, which is just north of Coyote Creek, and then North Bothin Marsh, which extends all the way to Arroyo Corte Madera del Presidio. And then it's bounded on the right or on the east-hand side by Richardson Bay, and then on the west side by Miller and El Monte Boulevard, running down to Tam Junction. And another really critical feature of the preserve is the Mill Valley-Sausalito pathway, and which is also known as a segment of the Bay Trail. Okay, and I just wanted to quickly catch everyone up in case you haven't joined us before. You know, we got started on this project with the understanding that we really need to address flooding on the Bay Trail. It already floods about 40 times a year. And we also knew that flooding is impacting the wetland habitats of Bothin Marsh. And with sea level rise, both of these issues are really going to be exacerbated. And I also just want to acknowledge that flooding and sea level rise is the issue throughout Southern Marin. And finally, that it's a really complex issue, and to address it meaningfully, we need to all be working closely together to collaborate on solutions. And so we can skip to the next slide. And, you know, to kick this project off, understanding that we really needed to work with everyone collaboratively, we spent a lot of time through about 20 or so events, whether it was kayaking, a bike ride, a historical lecture, and many others, to connect with as many of you as possible. And, you know, we ended up talking to about 600 folks, and we were able to talk about the challenges facing Bothin as well as the Bay Trail. But most importantly, that really gave us a good opportunity to hear from you about what your values and vision for the future of this special place were. And ultimately that turned into the Evolving Shorelines Shared Community Vision. Next slide. And so at the core of this vision, it's really the health and safety of the community, where we want to continue to have public access to the shoreline, and we want a trail experience that really motivates people to bike, walk, even horse ride around the community. And we also want to embrace and enhance the marsh's sponge-like ability to buffer our neighborhoods, roads, and businesses from storm surges and high tides. And we want to make sure that the wetlands continue to have the ability to provide important habitat for numerous species. And finally, we think it's important that we are innovators, and we openly share what we learned through this project and our efforts at Bothin Marsh about sea level rise throughout the community and the broader region. So it feels like a long time ago, but back in 2019 of November, we were fortunate to all have gathered in person at Proof Lab to kick off our current phase of the project, which is the conceptual design phase. And from there, you know, we moved through the challenges of 2020, and we're still able to get a lot of really important work done. We were able to complete a detailed site analysis explore all of the different opportunities and constraints on the site, and refine our goals for the project, stemming from that community vision. As well as we got to develop several conceptual alternatives for adapting the Bay Trail to floodwaters and increasing the resiliency of Bothin Marsh's wetlands. So whether it was at the virtual happy hour, virtual presentations to the Tam Valley NRG, or maybe some of you were part of the Mill Valley Middle School classes that we presented at, or MCL meetings or open space district meetings. We tried to get the word out as far and wide as we could over the past year, and we were able to connect ultimately with an additional 650 of you to talk about the concept alternatives. And so we just hope that through these virtual meetings, or watching a recording of a presentation or scrolling through the story map, that you felt connected to our planning process, and that we have been receptive to your input. Okay, so moving to our adaptation concepts. Again, in case you haven't seen these before, just going to briefly touch on this. Last time we all met virtually, we presented these 3 different conceptual options to raise the trail in place, to span the South Marsh, or to ring the South Marsh. And we focused a lot on the trail alignments because that's one independent decision that is a bit separate from enhancing the marsh resiliency. And some of the key differences between these 3 concepts are really just different approaches to elevating and perhaps realigning the Bay Trail. In regards to the marsh resiliency, we ultimately just really want to figure out how to get more sediment onto the marsh, which is the building block of marshes. And some of the ways that we're considering to do that are to improve the connectivity of the marsh to the tides from Richardson Bay, or look at Coyote Creek and the way that sediment from the watershed gets put onto the marsh itself. And also included in all of these 3 different concepts, which weren't mutually exclusive necessarily, are smaller scale wetland habitat enhancement features that could be applied to all 3 of these concepts, whichever direction we go. Okay, so now I'm going to get into some of the community feedback. I had already mentioned that we did several presentations, but we were also incredibly pleased to get over 815 people respond to our survey last winter. So I just want to give a sincere thanks to everyone that participated. Your feedback is really valuable and has helped shape our thinking about how this project gets shaped. And so I'm just going to focus on some of the highlights of our survey work, and then get into how your feedback influenced our evaluation of the different concepts. And I just want to note that a lot of the survey was intentionally designed to be open-ended, so that you really felt like you had a chance to just share your thoughts candidly with us. And it created a lot of work on our end to kind of wade through that. So this is our best representation of the results. So getting into one of the key questions, which was really focused on the pathway and approaches to elevating it out of the flood zone. We asked, what are the most important considerations to you? And what rose to the top resoundingly was just improving the safety of the multi-use pathway for everyone. Also, we need to pay attention to the views from the pathway and views of wildlife. And also important considerations are just making better connections to the community and providing opportunities to sit and look out over Bothin Marsh. And a little bit lower on the priority list was just the actual proximity to the marsh, views from the surrounding community of the marsh and the bay, or the proximity to the water's edge. And included that quote down at the bottom just to kind of encapsulate some of the important feelings that we're hearing from you. And we did ask a very explicit question about if we should extend the length of the Bay Trail. And somewhat surprisingly, we heard, 72% of folks say that they were comfortable with adding any length to the trail as long as it is protected from vehicles. So that's a really important thing for us to keep in mind. And there was a lot of additional feedback just saying additional length is a great thing for trails. So we're happy to hear that. Okay, so when we asked, what really excites you about this project, and in particular regarding the pathway, and what are some of your top concerns? Again, improving trail safety was very top of mind, as well as just that people were really excited about the opportunity for this project to enhance Bothin's wildlife habitat and the marsh itself. And I think it kind of goes without saying that folks are really excited about a trail that doesn't flood. And folks were concerned and excited about just what the experience of the marsh would be from any new trail. It's a really special place, and we need to maintain that experience. Sorry, could you go back just for a second, Christina? So I did want to touch on some of the other just important things to keep in mind as we move forward. The connectivity of trails to the community is up there, and also just improving surfacing, I think, is probably a safety measure that we are definitely going to incorporate into any new design. And I just wanted to acknowledge some of the concerns that folks rose. With cost, we had a kind of a full spectrum of excitement versus concern on cost, with some folks saying we should spare no expense, and others just asking us to be mindful of public money. So we're keeping that in mind. And also just, again, the aesthetics of a trail experience, and if it was next to a road, and just being mindful of noise and pollution. And I think another really important concern was just potential construction impacts or disruption, either that being to public access along the trail or to the marsh habitat or wildlife itself. Okay, thanks. Okay, and again, we didn't explicitly ask anyone to provide like a ranking of the different concepts. But in those open-ended responses, we did tabulate them, and the concept of ringing the South Marsh kind of rose to the top of being exciting for folks. And there seemed to be very, very little support for concept one, which would just build up the embankment along the existing alignment. Okay, so we had all of that great community feedback through our survey and through conversations during presentations. And that definitely influenced how we started to develop our evaluation of these different concepts. And when it came down to it, there was two really important decisions that we needed to make. And the first one was just, where is that trail going to be aligned in the future? And that is really going to inform how we design a lot of these marsh resilience measures and smaller habitat enhancement features. So we needed to make a trail alignment decision. And then the second really important decision was, how do we improve the marsh resilience? And how do we ultimately get more sediment onto the marsh to help it elevate in place and withstand higher levels of sea level rise. So just want to make it clear that we ended up treating these as two separate decisions to combine together for our ultimate path forward with the project. Okay, so our evaluation really broke down into 4 different categories, those being public access and trail connectivity, the ecological function, the cost, both one-time and recurring costs. And then we also just needed to think of the project within kind of our regional regulatory goals or regulatory priorities and goals and guidance. And we also, so we evaluated all 3 concepts as well as a no action project, just to understand the implications of flooding and sea level rise if we did nothing. So with the public access and trail connectivity category, we had a couple of really important criteria, and those included just safety, the visitor experience, our disruption of access to the trail, the adaptability of the trail in the long term, as well as new access and connectivity. So just an example of how your feedback kind of informed this evaluation is that with concept 3, we really saw lots of opportunity to provide more entry points to the trail and just make better connections, versus concepts 1 and 2 would just maintain the existing connectivity. And ultimately moving the trail out of the marsh and taking advantage of lots of existing higher ground gives us a lot of options for maintaining public access into the future. And we think it's the most adaptable trail option. And as far as ecological function, again, we heard it very clearly from you all that restoring the marsh, enhancing the marsh, making sure we have this important habitat and ecosystem into the future is top priority. So we weighed all of these different trail alignments and approaches against, how is that going to influence the ability to create new habitat? How is it going to preserve existing habitat? What opportunities do those different alignments provide for enhancing habitat? What are the temporary and long-term impacts? We have quite a robust list of those criteria, and it's really in the weeds, but when it came down to it, again, we saw the opportunity of the trail alignment concept 3 to provide the most improvements to marsh resiliency and ecological function in the long term. And I'll quickly touch on costs. All 3 of these concepts, are going to be expensive projects no matter what. And there's also still a lot of uncertainty with bay mud and engineering questions. And so we have a lot of work to do with our team to just understand the full cost of any one of these projects. So we're just responsibly managing our funds, and we're also just trying to align our ultimate project with funds that are coming down from the local, the regional, the state, and the federal level. So we want to make sure whatever project we end up with is fundable. And finally, similar to cost, we're working within a framework of regional guidelines and regulations, and they're really prioritizing multi-benefit projects. And through our technical evaluation, it feels like the location and the opportunity to incorporate more ecotone slopes with concept 3 are really the most compatible with providing multi-benefits and reducing the risk of flooding in the long term. So I've hinted at it plenty of times, but our favorite approach for the trail alignment decision is to move forward with the ring to south marsh concept and actually take the trail out of the marsh and put it on the perimeter of the open space preserve. And we really think that this is the best alternative for improving the ecological function and overall health of the marsh and its wildlife. We also think that it's going to provide a really neat experience. It'll be different, but there's plenty of opportunity to get overlooks of the marsh and view it from a different perspective, and especially see it evolve as we adapt to sea level rise. I think it also affords plenty of opportunity to maximize the safety of the pathway without being restricted to guardrails on a large expansive bridge or causeway. There's more opportunities to smartly develop pullouts and opportunities for overlooks where you can sit and enjoy the marsh without the fear of a collision or something like that. And then finally, I think I may have touched on this, but just to reiterate, I think it's going to provide really neat vantage points to watch this adaptation project in action. And there's going to be much more connections to the community. So shifting to our current map, just to orient you, this is present day conditions, and we can just move into what the trail alignment might look like in the future. And so we've got the Bay Trail shifted to the perimeter of not only north, but also south Bothin Marsh. And that really opens up a huge opportunity to restore the entire area along the former railroad embankment, which turned into the Bay Trail. And then again, those community connections that we can make, particularly along Almonte Boulevard and Tam Junction, are great opportunities. And next slide. Okay, so at this point, I'm gonna turn the floor over to Eddie DeVita from our team and ESA, and he's gonna talk through some of the marsh resiliency measures.
Cool. Thank you, Rob. Is my mic working? Can you hear me? We good? Cool. Yeah, thanks everyone. My name is Eddie DeVita, and I'm a civil engineer with Environmental Science Associates. And I'm going to be giving a kind of brief update on the marsh resilience measures. And some of you may remember from our prior workshops that the tidal marsh habitats at Bothin are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise due to a combination of the location, proximity to the Golden Gate and the Pacific Ocean, the low sediment supply, as well as the site history and the way that these marsh areas were filled. They were actually landfill in the bay, and certain portions of the marsh were not filled to a high enough elevation to support what would be typical for a mature tidal marsh, in particular in the southern portion of the preserve. So we have looked at a number of options, and we've come up with 3 potential measures, potentially feasible measures to support these marshes as sea levels rise. And the first one I'm going to talk about is to realign Coyote Creek, and this is something that we've presented in some of the prior meetings. And the key finding we've evaluated during this first phase is confirming that this option does not cause flooding upstream. And so we evaluated kind of in partnership with the Department of Public Works, several channel geometries that would move the channel through the marsh, different sizes, channels, different alignments and levels of sinuosity. And we found at least one option that does not cause flooding in Tam Junction, or rather does not increase flooding in Tam Junction. And so that was an exciting finding, and it means that this is a potentially feasible measure. Oh, we lost the slideshow. Here we are. And the nice thing about realigning the creek is that this is a measure that would be a kind of one-time project, but it restores the natural sediment delivery from the creek. And so it'll provide long-term benefits. And the second key technical study that we've completed is a sediment transport analysis, which informed an estimate of how much sediment would be deposited on the marsh and how much increased resilience we would get from this measure. And there's still some uncertainty in that and uncertainty in the rates of sea level rise, but we'd be looking at improving the lifespan of this marsh by 1 to multiple decades, depending on which sea level rise scenario projection we're looking at, which is a significant benefit for the habitats out here. There are a few next steps for this alignment, including confirming the creek sediment supply, which will help us kind of reduce the uncertainty, better understand exactly how much more resilience we expect from this measure. And also, we're looking at refining the geometry of the channel to avoid sensitive existing habitats. There's some rare plants in certain portions of the South Marsh, and we'd like to look at some additional options for weaving the channel through those features. Can I go to the next slide? So the second two measures are related, and we'll start with thin lift. This is a measure that would be importing sediment to the project site from nearby dredging projects and placing it on the marsh using a hydraulic slurry. So you're mixing the sediment with water and letting it flow across the marsh, mimicking kind of what would happen during a flood, where sediment-rich water from the creek would flow over the banks of the channel and get that sediment onto the marsh. This lets us create that process more frequently. And because you're kind of using engineering methods and coordinating with dredging, you could get a whole lot of sediment onto the marsh using this method, provided that there is enough sediment available regionally and enough dredging projects that you can borrow sediment from. So this is a method that has been explored elsewhere in the US. There's been a recent pilot study down in San Diego that we're tracking the monitoring for. And that's the photo you see here, the Seal Beach project. But it's never been done in an open tidal marsh in San Francisco Bay. There's been a few tests in diked wetlands, including up in Novato. But Bothin Marsh offers a great opportunity to do a at-scale pilot study for this method that could then inform thin lift projects throughout San Francisco Bay. It would help us better understand the impacts on the local ecology, as well as develop methods that would inform future projects designs. So we're recommending the development of this pilot study at Bothin, and there's a few key steps that will have to happen. One of them will be confirming a source of sediment. Where can we get it? And we've been talking with the Department of Public Works, and there is the potential to coordinate with dredging on Coyote Creek and bring that sediment to Bothin Marsh. It's a close site that's been dredged historically, and so there may be a way to line with future dredging on that channel, and as well as talking with folks like the Army Corps of Engineers and seeing if there's other dredging projects in the region that we could collaborate with. And then the next measure, if we flip ahead to the next slide, is a similar approach, except for instead of putting the sediment on the marsh directly, which gets the sediment there very efficiently, but it does disturb the wildlife and the plants. The second option would be placing the sediment on the mudflats offshore of the marsh. And then if you raise the mudflats high enough, waves will resuspend that material and the tides can bring it in and out, and a portion of that sediment will get back onto the tidal marsh. And so there's some key trade-offs, but there's also some similarities comparing it to thin lift. And what we'd like to do is kind of run a pilot study in parallel, testing mudflat augmentation and also the thin lift, so we can get a comparison and see which of these methods may be more appropriate for applications regionally. There's some technical studies related to the sediment transport and trying to understand how much of the sediment, if we place it on the mudflat, actually would make it onto the marsh. We know certainly not all of it will make it, and it may end up being a very small fraction. And so we want to use the sediment that's available. We want to use it wisely. And so we want to do some more technical analysis to make sure that this is a reasonable approach. But kind of in combination with thin lift, mudflat augmentation could be a tool to let us get sediment onto the marsh in a way that doesn't adversely impact the local ecology. Yeah, I think those are the key points on this one. Let's flip to the next measure. And so finally, we have also identified a number of measures that we recommend applying regardless or in combination with all of the above. These are sort of best management practices for enhancing the marsh ecology. They're generally lower cost, flexible, and scalable, having to do with managing the vegetation, invasive plants, as well as small scale grading that you might be able to do with volunteers or using hand tools to improve circulation in the marsh interior. And so as we develop designs for the trail and refine the pilot studies for the sediment placement, we will be looking for the best ways to integrate these smaller scale measures to improve the local ecology and create a more resilient kind of marsh, tying all of these actions together. Yeah, and so, you know, looking ahead, we're really excited that this project has been included on the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority's project list to be recommended for Measure AA funding this fall. And that will help support some of the additional technical studies and design that we just discussed. And yeah, we're very excited to keep moving forward with this process, and we will be keeping you updated as we move along.
Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go into Q&A, and I'm sorry that we had technical difficulties early in the meeting, and I wasn't able to say hello to you all and introduce myself. So here's a late hello. I'm Veronica Pearson, and I'm working on this project I'm co-managing it with Rob Laporte. So thanks, Rob, for taking the lead on this, and for all of you for sharing your evening with us. And I also want to thank you for all the questions that you've been submitting to the chat. So before I dive into a lot of these, I just want to provide an additional background for those that are new to joining on to follow our Evolving Shorelines project, and say that this project was really started with a focus on our preserve, the Bothin Marsh Preserve, and the boundaries of our project are those of our preserve, but our project area, the scope includes looking at work that is happening on adjacent lands or opportunities that might exist with our neighbors. So right now what you see is restricted to the lands that we manage, but with the release of these concepts, we have had a great response from our adjacent neighbors and cities and other jurisdictions and agencies that are interested in following what we're doing and finding ways to collaborate so that our project doesn't just end at our boundaries, because we know that water is not going to stop at the edges of our project, and it's going to find other ways to move and flow. So really our project is not going to be effective if only we build it and there isn't other work that is done to build off of the foundation that we're trying to lay. With that, I also want to say that we have luckily been able to get Caltrans to participate in our project meetings at the early stages. And in particular, one success that we've had is we were able to purchase a parcel that is on the eastern side of the boundary of the preserve near right now, the segment that we're, yeah, there you go, Christina, thanks. The segment of where the concept 3 would skirt the edge of the preserve. So that went to our board this month, and the purchase was agreed upon and will be finalized really shortly. So, some of you might have, if you've walked along that back road there, seen a lot of debris, and it does not look very attractive. But our project will hopefully make improvements to that. And let's see, what did I also want to say? There was also questions raised about, like, how are we going to connect? Can we connect to Marin City? Like, what's going to happen for flooding in Manzanita? And unfortunately, we can't answer, that right now at the stage of our project. All I can really just say is that we're also looking for additional funding that can come to 1TAM and Parks and DPW to find perhaps create connector trails from Marin City to the multi-use path, look at ways to elevate the trail near Pohono down to Gate 6. Also, we're looking at working more closely with Marin City entities that are developing the restoration project near the Gateway Shopping Center, and making sure that we're all sharing data and we're trying to not recreate anything, and utilize all the tools in our box, as well as the skills and abilities of other experts that are doing good work in this area. So I think with that, I'm going to just quickly go through some of these questions. One of the questions was looking at the dam at Highway 101 Bridge. And I really wish Roger Leventhal was on this call, because we just had a meeting and he did discuss this. So once again, this is outside of our preserve, but I could perhaps follow up with Gary and share Roger Leventhal's recent slide show that he did. So Gary, if you want to connect with me or Rob, feel free to email us and we can give you more information on that. And let's see what else we got here. Yeah, as I said, we're looking at ways to help work with DPW and leverage funding opportunities, and think about conceptual designs to link to Marin City and address other flooding. And I will say that our project isn't necessarily to create flood protection for the community, but there's many benefits to our project. One is being able to absorb, surface flows that would otherwise maybe contribute to upstream flooding on Coyote Creek. And as Rob said, marshes could act as a sponge and absorb lots of water. So with more of with a healthy marsh, we'll be able to the preserve will be able to do that better. And I also provided a link to the story map that was created by DPW, so you can go to that, and there's a great amount of information about the different studies DPW has done, looking at about ways to address flooding in Manzanita and Tam Valley. And I don't see Chris Chu on this presentation this evening, but she's a great resource and she's always happy to talk to anybody about it. So feel free to connect with her by email. And there's questions about pollutants and potential use of sediment, and if we bring in sediment. And actually, Eddie might want to talk about this, but we will be required to test for pollutants before they can get deposited or routed onto the marsh. So that is a study that will have to happen.
Yeah, would you like me to comment a little more on that, Veronica?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, yeah. Well, and so the Regional Water Quality Control Board has standards for, pollutant concentrations in tidal wetlands, as well as in upland areas or areas that drain to wetlands. And so any fill that would be imported to the site, either from dredging or kind of structural fill to build the trail embankment, would be tested and would need to meet the water board's criteria. There's also, the potential that there may be contaminants in the sediments already. They were, because this, was historic fill where the marshes are now, some of those sediments may have been impacted by upland agriculture, pesticides, and that sort of thing. And so that becomes kind of a different question where you're looking at not making things worse than they are right now and improving things if you can. And so, yeah, those are details that we'll be looking at and considering as we go into the preliminary design phase and through the project.
And Eddie, while you're talking, could you also, there's a question about at what level of sea level rise does the ecotone levee get breached? Can you talk a little bit about our design?
Yeah, so we've been working with BCDC to strategize on the elevation of the trail and planning for different potential sea level rise amounts. And our current approach would be to construct the trail to accommodate 3 feet of sea level rise as it would be built in the near term, but build in sort of sufficient width in the trail embankment so that you could raise it in the future to go beyond that 3 feet. And so if we're looking at 5 or 7 feet by 2100, we're not going to build what would it be, 10-foot high embankment today, but we would be able to raise it in the future as needed, depending on what the future sea level rise rates are. And part of the reason for that approach is that there is such a wide range in the projections for the end of century sea level rise, and just managing costs as well as ecological impacts, having that like near-term resilience and then building in adaptive capacity so you can increase the sea level rise accommodation in the future as we see more and learn more about how fast sea levels are going to rise.
Thanks. And then I got a question here that maybe Rob can tackle. And I know that we have data that shows that we get about 2,000 users a day that take advantage of our multi-use path. Rob, do you know if there's any breakdown on the user groups?
Oh gosh, I would have to follow up on some of the data analysis from the trail counters, but I do know it gets a heavy proportion of bicyclist traffic, and I know BCDC or MCBC has done some good tabulation of that, but I'm happy to make a note of that and provide actual stats. Sorry,
yeah,
I
it's
can't
in
remember
our
on the fly right now.
it's also published in our planning memo, existing conditions report. We have a breakdown of weekly and weekend comparisons for the users, but I don't have the numbers on the top of my head either, but good reference.
Yeah, so I think that question was from Carrie. So Carrie, feel free to email Rob and I if you, oh wait, no, that wasn't from Carrie. That was from Donald. So Donald, if you want to know that breakdown, we can try to get that info to you. And pretty soon, I think I'm going to have a slide coming that has Robin, my contact info on it for everybody, and we'll put it in the chat too. Also, let's see, we got a couple of questions to wrap up. One of which I think is rather important. It's about whether this is like the only time we're taking public comment. And I just want to be clear that we are going to probably talk to you guys more than you want us to talk to you. We're going to talk to you all the time. So this is just a small step into a lot longer process of developing the designs. And like we said, this is all conceptual. So we're thinking we have a few steps that we have to keep taking to figure out how to turn the concept into reality. And in particular, the next step is a 30% developing what we call a 30% design. And we're going to be moving ahead with that for the trail alignment, the multi-use path, and getting to know or getting to understand some of the existing conditions that might, limit the concept in any way. So as Eddie said, we got some more studies coming up. And so really, like, there's a chance where that concept 3 could get tweaked, where we're looking at that southern section and the multi-use path might change. As you could see in the concept, it kind of skirts Shoreline Highway. It goes by a Caltrans parcel. So there's a lot to look at in terms of ownership, and even look at what we can do also as well on that portion of our preserve that abuts I believe it's the Holiday Inn now, right? I think I went back to being the Holiday Inn. So we're still looking at ways to effectively design the project, and once we get a better sense of what's going to happen with the Marsh connection with Coyote Creek 2, we'll come back and share it with you all. So the goal is to have a defined project for taking through CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. But we're not there yet. We still have some more steps to go to, and we'll be talking to all of you along the way as we do that. Man, these questions are coming in fast. So let's see where I left off. How many feet has the sea level risen in the last 50 years, 30 years, 10 years in our area?
I actually saw that and just looked it up. The San Francisco tide gauge, which is located just east of the Golden Gate Bridge at Chrissy Field, has a record that goes back to the 1800s, and they've measured an average of 8 inches every century over that time period. So, it's less than an inch a decade, but the projections going forward are forecasting an accelerated rate of sea level rise, and so that's what we're planning for with this project. There's a wide range in variations in those projections, and so that's why we're taking that build some resilience and then build adaptive capacity approach for this project. Oh, and someone wants a link to that. Yeah, I can post a link to that.
All right, Christina or Rob, do you have a last question to wrap up, and then we can try to address some of these other questions via email if you guys want to connect with us over email too, because it is now 7 o'clock and some of us may want to eat dinner.
I'm not seeing a final question, Veronica, to dive into, but I agree. I think we could take all of these and give some written responses in the follow-up email.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your questions. I also want to acknowledge how this project is being funded. As Eddie said, we're going to have some funding coming through, it looks like, from the Measure AA, and we're excited about that. But we also have been fortunate to have funding from the Coastal Conservancy, as well as, and I should say the Coastal Conservancy with the Marin Community Foundation support as well, and philanthropic support through One TAM, and our local Measure A funding has all made significant contributions to this, the development of this project, and also thank our project team for being able to put together this presentation for you all. Eddie and Christina working in the background, and as well as thanking to our Stephanie Moulton-Peters, our Board of Supervisors, for taking the time to join us, and as well as Wambua. That was great. I look forward to diving into your survey more myself. And let's see, I think, and thank you all, because as you can see, this is really, this wouldn't be possible, us being able to share this work with you, if you didn't complete our survey and if you didn't talk to your neighbors and you didn't share this. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for your questions. And we look forward to hopefully having an in-person presentation in the near future, and being able to engage with you all again at Bothin Marsh, and maybe even have another future kayaking event so we can see you on the water. So to my team, is there anything else you want to say in wrapping up?
I would just add, thank you so much for everyone taking time out of their evening to join. And we will be posting this recording on onetam.org/Bothin, as well as providing a written report of all the really detailed analysis that we've done in the coming weeks. So thanks again, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Hey, Jack.